Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on all the various wildfires that we have going on throughout California. We have the Caldor Fire, the Dixie Fire, the Mcfarland Fire, the Monument Fire, the River Complex, and the Antelope Fire. So we're going to be diving into all the most recent updates when it comes to what's happened with all those fires over the last 24 hours. And then we're also going to be taking a close look at the fire weather forecast because it looks like there's going to be some changes coming over the next 24 hours. You can see that throughout the day today, we still had those northerly winds pushing all that smoke down into California. I know looking out my window right now, certainly seeing a lot more smoke and haze than I was in previous weeks. But that's part of what's going to be in the big change looking forward, is we are going to have another wind reversal. So we're going to look at what that wind reversal will be, with the impacts that might have on our air quality, but most importantly, the impacts that future fire weather conditions will have on all of our wildfires. So, two things I want to say before we really jump in here. One is that if you're watching this video after the live stream, you'll be able to either go down into the time bar below or the top comment, where I always pin the top comment, and I will put all the chapter timestamps for the Dixie Fire, Caldor Fire, air quality forecast, those kind of things. So you can just click directly to the story that you're most interested in and hopefully save some time. Now, the other thing that I will mention is I'm also planning on doing a more concise video again, just like I did yesterday, where I just go through all the different fires. I plan on going Dixie Fire, then Caldor Fire, then Monument, and then we'll quickly look at Mcfarland River Complex and Antelope. So I plan on just going through all the most important information in as concise a way as possible, and then if there is some time at the end of the video, then I'll hopefully get to some questions. Now, I do just want to briefly check the live chat before I dive into the video, just to make sure I have sound and everything sounds good there. So I think we are all good. I have once done a 30-minute live stream before, only to check the live chat afterwards, and there was no sound the entire time. So that is always a good thing to check there. But without further ado, let's start diving into our various wildfires. And overall, very similar day to what we had yesterday. We had those northerly winds throughout the day today. So you can see that those areas and those wildfires that weren't covered in a lot of that smoke, like the northern edge of the river complex and the northern edge of the Dixie Fire, those were the areas that did see more activity today. So definitely Dixie Fire is going to be the key fire we're spending the most time on. And then Caldor Fire and Monument Fire had similar conditions to yesterday, where they had that very thick smoke inversion over them, and that actually reduced their fire behavior throughout the day today, just like it did yesterday, which is honestly some great news there. And throughout this whole video, I'd say there is a mix of good news and bad news when it comes to most of the updates that we're going to be talking about. But once again, we had those northerly winds throughout the day today, not as strong as in previous days, certainly not as strong as 2 days ago. So overall, we had somewhat diminished activity, but it does look like some of that activity on the river complex and some of those hot spots on the Dixie Fire do look like they're starting to pick up over the last 30 minutes. So it is going to be interesting to see what this satellite imagery looks like at the end of this live stream versus what it does look like right now. So one thing that I always look to see how hot the fires are burning, you can see we do have that hot spot on the river complex right there. Looks like Monument Fire was flaring up earlier today, but overall, I would say this is a pretty great map of our wildfires, especially when compared with some of the days in the past. I'll remind you, it wasn't all that long ago when the Dixie Fire and the Caldor Fire, in that same day, I believe it was 2 days ago, we had bright red glowing wildfire areas on the northwestern section of the Dixie, north of Lake Almanor, on that northern finger that looked like it was getting close to Susanville, on that hot spot that looked like it was getting close to Janesville, and then the entire Caldor Fire was even brighter red than the Dixie Fire, as it was growing about 40,000 acres in one day. So overall, I would say good wildfire conditions throughout the day today. Part of the reason for that was that low pressure system that was causing all those extreme winds over the last few days has finally started to exit. So we have had some gustier winds today, but not as gusty as in previous days. So that was part of the reason that we've had diminished activity. And then the bigger reason we've had diminished activity is there's so much smoke sitting over our fires that it actually keeps our temperatures down, which keeps your temperature gradients down, which ends up keeping your winds down as well. This is something that we've seen throughout this year, especially seeing on the Monument Fire today, which is covered in that river complex smoke, and the Caldor Fire, which has been covered in that Dixie Fire smoke. We've seen this a number of times this year where the forecast will be maybe 95 degrees with 25-mile-per-hour winds, a very critical fire weather forecast. And then you get so much smoke over the fire that sunlight can't come in, that solar radiation can't come in, and then it only ends up being 70 degrees with 10-mile-per-hour winds. So that, I think, is the big reason that we have had more favorable conditions throughout the day today than in previous days. But again, with that being said, does look like we're starting to flare up a little bit, especially on the river complex and parts of the Dixie Fire. So we are going to keep a close eye on all of these fires throughout the course of this live stream. But I do want to go to the Dixie Fire first. First thing you notice is that much of Sacramento Valley and stretching into Northern California is still in that red flag warning. Looks like it is through 8 p.m. tonight. But the good news is, and it does cover the Mcfarland Fire there, but the good news is that the Dixie Fire is out of that red flag, so is the Monument Fire, the River Complex, and the Caldor Fire as well. So that's another part of the reason we had diminished activity throughout the day today, is that red flag warning that we had for 2 days straight has finally gone away. But quick look at the Dixie Fire, where those hot spots are. You can see the areas that were burning the most actively, and you can almost guess what the predominant wind direction was over the last 2 days based on where those hot spots are. You can see we had a lot of hot spots on the southern edge right here, a lot of hot spots north of Lake Almanor, but it was good to see those weren't stretching out from the previous fire perimeter, so seemed to hold in place right there. Although we did have one smoke plume we were looking at yesterday. We had this was an area where we saw a fair bit of growth yesterday. We even had a spot fire come down right here, and I know that they've been working on that throughout the day today. And then also lots of growth to the south of that spot fire that did work its way into Janesville about 3 nights ago. So just based on where those hot spots are, you could pretty much guess that the winds the past 2 days have been mostly from the north, and that's why the predominant fire spread has been to the south. That's actually the opposite of what the Dixie Fire usually looks like. Usually we get those strong southwesterly winds in the afternoon, and that pushes the fire up to the north and the northeast. But over the last few days, we have had that big wind shift that we've been talking about. Looks like we do still have some north winds over us, so we are continuing to see that fire spread to the south. If you need some evidence that we still have northerly winds, you can just look at what direction that smoke is going. It's all still going to the south. That's why looking out my window, the air quality is fairly bad, but there's two sides to every coin. The air quality is bad, and you can't maybe use as much aircraft on the Monument or Caldor fires, but all that smoke is keeping our fire behavior down. So I personally would take the bad air quality for reduced fire behavior. I would say that is a fair trade-off to make. But just looking again, you can actually see where those hot spots were even better. Right there, that was an area where we did have a lot of growth yesterday. A lot of growth on that area as well. We were watching the Taylorsville area fairly closely, and I do know CAL FIRE is positioning a large amount of resources there to make sure that growth that we've had there doesn't continue to get out of hand. And then you can also see that spot fire right there. I know that they're working on containing that as well. Now, one area that we were worried about yesterday was this area north of Lake Almanor. If I turn the structures on, you can see why we were worried about it. We have all those structures around Lake Almanor and Westwood as well, and yesterday we were looking at a smoke plume coming off of the Dixie Fire right here, and we had those strong northerly winds, so we were afraid that might jump the containment lines and work its way into some of these structures, but it sounds like CAL FIRE did an amazing job keeping that hotspot in check, and they're still fairly confident in a lot of their lines in this area to protect those areas around Lake Almanor. And when we look at the evacuation warnings, I believe it's this map right here, looks like they're actually starting to lift some of those evacuation orders and turning them just into evacuation warnings instead. So that is a change right there, and kind of paints the picture of how confident they are feeling around that Lake Almanor area. So I would say that's a good sign. Now, one other spot that we were a little bit concerned about yesterday was Westwood. We had hotspots right here and right here, and this was one of our windier spots yesterday. That's why we did have a large amount of growth. You can see all those red hotspots that we had yesterday. And I do know that this is one of the top priorities for CAL FIRE right now. They're working on dozer lines, especially on this eastern side, to make sure that that hotspot there doesn't find its way into Westwood. And they're also already prepping some of the structures in that area to make sure that there's some good structure protection in place. If we actually want to look at that hotspot right there, I have the camera loaded up. So there's the camera. It's right on Dyer Mountain, pointing almost over Westwood. Westwood would be on the far left of this camera, and then it's pointing where that hotspot is. We can see what it's been doing over the last couple of hours. You can see very smoky conditions earlier in the day, and then right there, you can kind of see where that smoke plume is. Might be easier if I... No, can't really zoom in on these maps. Sort of. So right there, don't want that. Let's try to zoom out here. Having some technical difficulties. So let's go back to the 3-hour time lapse of that one, just so we can see it again. So again, Westwood, I believe, would be right over here. And we do still have that activity that we can see from the Dyer Mountain cam, but overall, I would say much reduced conditions compared to what we have seen in some of our previous days, where we have those gigantic pyrocumulus clouds coming up and just looking almost apocalyptic. Do still have some smoke coming off, but not as bad as previous days, I would say. Now, one of the other areas that we were concerned about yesterday was this area right here. So I want to see the live hotspots to see how that one's doing. And I wanted to show those live hotspots because you can see there is still a fair amount of heat activity going on in that area. Again, it's those northerly winds that have been pushing that part of the fire farther and farther south. That's an area we were watching closely yesterday. And the big thing that I will say there is that CAL FIRE is working very hard to get some lines around that area and some structure protection as well to make sure that that does not go into the area of Taylorsville. Now, coming back here, you can see where those hotspots are to the east of Westwood. That's exactly what we were just looking at on that camera. We were looking over, I believe that's either a lake or a reservoir. So there is still some fire activity there, but you can see it's those yellow boxes. In the past, it was bright red and growing down to the south. So definitely reduced in that area compared to the previous days. And what I'm most happy to see is this area north of Lake Almanor isn't showing any hotspots right now. I looked at the camera and it did look like there was maybe some smoldering, some smoke in that area, but certainly wasn't one of those giant pyrocumulus clouds coming up. Now you can also see though that we do still have a fair bit of activity on that northwestern side, and with those northerly winds, that is an area that I expect to continue to see some growth over the next 24 hours. Now, going to the last hotspot activity, we've talked about all these areas at this point. There's that northwestern section. I do expect to see more growth to the south there. Great to see the hotspot north of Lake Almanor appears to be gone. There is that hotspot to the east of Westwood, but they're working hard to get some containment lines in there and some structure protection. Good news for Susanville is all the growth on that has been to the south over the past couple of days. So there was a period where Susanville was actually I was starting to get scared for Susanville as we had those 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts pushing that hotspot closer and closer to Susanville. But once that wind shift came in, it basically just pushed the fire back down on itself and away from Susanville. So that is some great news there. And the other great thing that happens when you get that wind reversal is then they're actually able to get some firefighters into that area and work on putting in some containment lines and some dozer lines up there, so that if the winds do turn around, which they will be turning around as we'll see in the fire weather forecast, then you actually have some lines in place that you normally wouldn't have been able to put in place if it was just constantly moving up towards the northeast. So Susanville definitely looking much better than previous days. Now, one area that I do still have some concern is this hotspot that is south of Janesville. Looks like it has certainly calmed down from what it looked like yesterday, but it is fairly close towards, still close to some of these structures, and we do still have some of those northerly winds for places like Milford, so I am continuing to watch that, although to sum that one up, I'd say looking much better than in previous days, and definitely looking much better in the Janesville area. So that, I would say, is some great news there. I will remind you, there was that one night where I was doing the update and forecast, and it started as a little spot fire down here. It spotted from the major blaze about 5 miles. A burning ember was picked up by the winds, dropped into some critically dry fuels, and then over the course of a few hours, we just watched it get closer and closer to Janesville. And then, unfortunately, it actually did make its way into Janesville. We'll look at the structures destroyed map in a second. Did see some structure damage there, but Cal Fire did do an amazing job at kind of holding that fire in place and not letting it just rip through the entire area. And then once that wind shift happened, just like what worked towards Susanville's favor, same thing kind of worked for Janesville. Those winds shifted to the north and basically just pushed the fire away from Janesville. Now, bad news for Milford, although I don't believe the fire has actually reached down there yet, and it does look like that heat signature is reduced compared to yesterday, but do still have some northerly winds, so I am keeping an eye on that area moving forward. But just to illustrate the improvement in conditions that we've had over Janesville, I have this map pulled up right here, so you can see what this points at. There's the camera, it's pointing at the western shore of Honey Lake right there, almost directly to where we saw that hotspot coming down this ridgeline. This is directly where that hotspot was coming down that ridgeline. There was one night in one of the updates and forecasts, I believe it was maybe 2 nights ago, you could go back and watch that on my channel, but we were basically watching the flames come down this hillside. It's hard to see exactly where it is because there's so much smoke over Janesville throughout the day today. But we were watching the flames come down this hillside. We were watching people evacuate on Highway 395. And then we watched all the lights in the town get turned off as the power went out. So that was certainly a dramatic night. But if we look at what it looks like over the last few hours, you can see a much less dramatic scene going on. We do still have that smoldering area right there, maybe a smoldering area over here. It is a little hard to see through all the smoke. It does look like you can sort of see that smoke plume far off in the distance if you look really closely, but overall this looks much better than it did a few nights ago. I know that might sound weird because it looks like it's absolutely terrible conditions, but the other night we were watching flames come down this hill, and now it just looks like there's maybe 1 or 2 slightly smoldering areas left. Again, the big thing that's helped the Janesville area is the winds have been pushing that fire away from you for the last 2 days. So overall, Dixie Fire looking much better today than we have been in previous days. Key areas I would say that I'm going to be watching over the next few hours. I am going to be watching that eastern area around Westwood, just keeping an eye on it, although it looks like the hotspots are not as strong as previous days, and it does look like they have a fair bit of distance between there. I am going to continue to watch this hotspot very closely. I know Cal Fire has made this a key priority, and they have a lot of resources down here, but we do have a fair bit of heat coming off of that right now. And then I'm also going to continue to watch this. Sounds like Cal Fire has some strategy in place to protect areas like Milford, but we do still have those northerly winds, so that will act to continue to try to push that hotspot farther to the south. So those are the key areas I'm watching on the Dixie Fire. When it comes to the update for the Dixie Fire, let's see if we update this, if it changes. No, so when it comes to the numbers, you can see Dixie Fire is up to about 680,000 acres, so certainly went up from what it was yesterday. We're up to 35% containment though, so did gain a little containment. If we want to see where that containment is, you can see most of it is on the southern area of the Dixie Fire, and it sounds like they really are feeling confident about this western edge right here, not expecting any growth to the west right there, although we will likely continue to see this area continue to burn over the next 12 hours as those northerly winds continue. Now, two spots that I'm very happy to see that black line, probably should have said this first, but the black line is where the fire is contained, the red line is where the fire is uncontained. And I would say the two areas that I'm happiest to see where we're contained is that Chester area. You can see how the fire literally surrounded the community of Chester, but then now we are considering that contained. And when we look at the evacuation maps, again, it looks, again, don't take my word for it, go to the local resources for all this kind of information, but it looks like Chester is out of an evacuation order and is now into an evacuation warning. And I believe I heard in the Cal Fire update this morning that they are starting to work on some repopulation. So that sounds like some good news there. The other place where I love to see that containment is north of Quincy. That was an area that maybe 2 weeks ago we were very concerned about that as the fire was making that southern push right there, but looking good in that area. Key places I hope to see containment over the next couple of days or maybe a week or two. I'd love to see that northern area of Lake Almanor wrapped up, because that's an area that continues to stay on my radar. And then also would love to see some containment around Westwood, and I know they are working very hard in both of those areas to make that happen. Also around Taylorsville, where we have that hotspot right now, that'll be a key area to try to wrap up over the next couple days, as well as that northern area around Janesville. I would imagine they've made some great progress there, and I did hear that they were able to use some air resources, dropping some retardant there, utilizing some hand crews, some dozers, to really try to wrap up that spot, so once those winds shift around, it doesn't move back into Janesville. So some really great work being done all around the Dixie Fire over the last couple of days. So lots of good stuff going on there. Now, I've mentioned this a couple times, but you can see there are a large amount of evacuation orders still in place. So although so far throughout this video I've probably sounded like it is mostly good news, just reminding you that looking at the satellite imagery, it does look like it has been picking up over the last 30 minutes. And we've seen throughout the season how these wildfires can really just change on a dime, and what's true 1 second can be the complete opposite 30 minutes later. So even though I might be giving you some good confidence on the Dixie Fire right now, there's lots of things to watch, and I do have those key areas where I am still a bit hesitant, especially that one around Taylorsville and that's hotspot around Milford that I'm going to be watching very closely over the next few hours. But when it comes to those evacuation orders, does look like they've turned those into warnings around Lake Almanor, so I would say that's some good news there. And key area to watch will be this area around Susanville, as they have made some great progress on that northern edge of the fire up there, as the winds have been blowing it away from Susanville over the last couple of days. And then also going to keep a very close eye on Janesville as well, as that's another area where the hotspots over the last 2 days have actually been moving away from that area, and they've been doing some great job putting in some good line and protection there. So back to the updates again with all those things like evacuation orders, always best to just stay updated with your local resources. I almost purposely don't go over them individually through my videos because I put the links in the description, and I always feel it's better to get that kind of information straight from the source, so there's no possibility for confusion when I'm the middleman. So one aspect where some bad news does come in, this is part of the bad news that we're going to be seeing in this video today, is that the structures destroyed is up to 1,217 on the Dixie Fire. And if we want to see where that is, most of that is still in the Greenville area. You can see that was maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago as of right now, where fire just ripped through that area, and you could see large amount of structures destroyed there. But the recent uptick in structures, I think, has come back from the damage assessment teams that were sent into that area where the hotspot was able to move into the Janesville area, and we do have some structures destroyed up there. So again, I put the link for this in the description as well, and what you can actually do is click in here, and if you're worried about your property, the black houses are where there is no damage. The red houses is where the damage assessment team went in and they said that the structure was more than 50% destroyed. And then something you can do is actually click on the structure itself and look at a photo of it. So this is one of the more heartbreaking things that you can do when it comes to these wildfires. You can do this with all those red structures you see there. You can look at the photos, and it's just pretty devastating to see that as that fire goes through, most of the photos you see, it just looks like there's almost nothing left, that's where you have to, it's kind of easy to remove emotion if you're just thinking about maps and hotspots and orange dots like that. But looking at these kind of photos is, I think, beneficial because it does remind you that that's somebody's entire life, all their memories, their photo albums, just wrapped up right there, and it really helps it hit home. Certainly no pun intended there, but helps it hit home of the seriousness of the wildfires that we have been having throughout this season. So again, if you do live in that area and you are worried about your structures, I put the link for that in the description where you can check and see how your location may have fared as that spot fire was able to make its way up into the Janesville area. So switching to a more positive note, let's look at the resources on the Dixie Fire. And this is where I'd say the good news has been for the Dixie Fire over the last couple of weeks is we have an absolute army on this thing. We have 20 helicopters, over 500 engines, 200 dozers, about 200 water tenders, 6,000 personnel, and 85 crews. So that's part of the reason there's been so much great work done on the Dixie Fire, and part of the reason that things like when that spot fire was working its way into Janesville, that it wasn't worse, is because we have a lot of resources on this thing, and they've been doing some incredible work. And especially in that Janesville area, when that was happening, it for a second looked like it was going to be another Greenville, but they had seen this coming for maybe 4 or 5 days. They had a whole resource redistribution plan in place. They were able to get 5 strike teams out there and basically stop the fire in its tracks before it moved through any more of the area. So pretty amazing job done by Cal Fire on that one. And again, if you're just tuning in, Dixie Fire up to 680,000 acres, which it still stands at the number 2 largest wildfire in the history of California. And if we want to see how that might change over the next couple of days, we can look at the fire weather forecast, where there actually is going to be a significant change over the next 48 hours. Lots going on as we go into the weekend. So there's that low pressure system that brought those gusty winds that actually created that spot fire that went into Janesville. When it first came in, it brought those gusty southwesterly winds, about 35 to 40 miles per hour. Then as it moved through Oregon, you can see it brought those northerly winds as you're on the left side of that counterclockwise flow of that low. And then as that's moved off throughout the day today, that's why we've had Still had some gusty northerly winds, as you could tell by looking at the satellite imagery where that smoke is moving down to the south, but certainly was weaker than in previous days, so that's why that red flag warning was lifted. So if we look at Friday, it looks like at first we're just switching to a more typical California pattern where you have somewhat of a ridge over you. That means you're most likely going to have very warm, dry conditions. But then where things start to change is it looks like once again we have another low pressure system going through Washington and Oregon. So once again, we're going to have first those westerly and southwesterly winds as we're on the bottom edge of that counterclockwise flow right there. And then once again, it's going to switch briefly to northerly winds, but then that one looks like it's going to be moving out a lot quicker than that last one. And I would say just at first glance, this one I would say looks weaker than that last system that came through. So hopefully that means we won't have those 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts and that red flag warning like we did when that one came through. So very similar pattern as we get into Friday evening into early Saturday. We're going to have that wind shift back to southwest and then possibly back to north again. So bit of a whiplash when it comes to our winds over the next couple of days. So if we want to look at what the conditions look like right now, you can see mostly northerly winds, but relatively weak over the Dixie Fire, so that's some good news. Although by weak, it still would be considered gusty any other day, 15 to 20 miles per hour, but weak compared to the last few days where we had 35 to 40 mile per hour winds. And then as we get into tonight, I'm happy to say that the winds are really going to be dying down over the Dixie Fire. And then as we get into Friday, so that's when that low starts to come in and we get that wind shift back to our more usual pattern. As we go into 5 p.m., you can see what that's going to look like as that low comes in right there, bottom of the low, so you get switched to a more southwesterly flow. Does look like we're going to have some strong 30 to 35 mile per hour winds tomorrow afternoon. So that is certainly going to be a key thing that I'm watching as, again, over the last 3 days, we've had northerly winds pushing our fire down to the south. This is going to act to try to push that fire behavior back up to the north. So the key thing I'll be watching is when it comes to those hot spots that they've actually been able to work on some containment lines on the northern edges because all the smoke and everything was being blown down to the south. It'll be interesting to see if those new containment lines are able to hold as those strong winds come in tomorrow. So let's check out the other fire weather variables that we're going to be having. Just summing up the winds, I will say, given that we'll be back to some 30 to 35 mile per hour winds from the southwest, does look like we will have some tricky conditions to work with tomorrow afternoon. Let's see what the temperature is doing. Not in the mid 90s, so I'd say that's the good news there, but still certainly warm. And then just like we've seen for the last maybe 2 months, California remains very dry, relative humidity in the teens, and all our fuels are critically dry as of right now. So I would say big shift in the weather pattern the last few days. We've had those northerly winds, but throughout the day tomorrow, those will be shifting back to southwesterly, and does look like we will have some strong gusts. That'll switch back to about 32 in a second here. Does look like we will have some strong gusts tomorrow, so that'll be a key thing to watch as our fire activity moves back around. Now the good news for that is if you're in California and you're sick of all that smoke, though that wind pattern will most likely act to start to push that smoke back up in areas like Nevada and Idaho, instead of those northerly winds pushing that smoke directly down into Sacramento Valley and the Bay Area. So overall, big change in the forecast for tomorrow. We're going to have relatively warm temperatures. We're going to have still very dry air, and then we will have those wind gusts coming in as well. And then it looks like even stronger wind gusts on Saturday afternoon. So we're going to definitely have to watch conditions closely on Saturday as well, as it looks like those gusty southwesterly winds are sticking around over the Dixie Fire. So with all that being said in the fire weather forecast, we can actually look at what the Warfest Fire model is predicting for the Dixie Fire over the next 2 days, or we can look at what it was predicting for the day today. You can see predicting all those northern... Actually, before I play this, I should, just in case you're new to this channel, this is something I always show. It's the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory. We run this out of the Fire Weather Research Laboratory. It's called Warfest Fire, and it's one of the top wildfire simulation models in the world. Basically combines the fire perimeter and the active hotspots with the fuel, weather, topography variables. And then what sets this model apart from a lot of the other models is it does a very good job of simulating how the wildfire actually starts to create its own weather, which then influences the fire. So what we always do in these videos is watch what this model is predicting for where that fire is going to grow. And key thing I always point out is how wherever you have those winds pointing, that is where you end up seeing the fire growth. So just clicking through the day today, you can see that it was predicting those northerly winds. So because of that, on the southern areas of where we had those hot spots, that's where it predicted the growth. On the southern area, that northwestern edge, the area around Taylorsville that we have been watching, and then that southern area around Milford as well. That's what it was predicting. And then key thing, so this is now getting into early tomorrow morning. So this is about to show you what hasn't happened yet. Key thing I want to point out is to watch for when that wind shift happens, because that's the big thing that's changing between today and tomorrow. That big wind shift that's going to be going down tomorrow evening as that low starts to find its way in and the winds shift from that northerly direction to that southwesterly direction. So clicking into tomorrow, you can see it's August 20th, about 2 in the morning. You can see we still have those northerly winds. Does show a little growth north of Lake Almanor, but I think our lines are going to hold right there. That is one thing. This doesn't take into account fire suppression tactics, so most likely see less fire growth than what this is actually predicting. But then right there, you see those winds shift back to the southwest. So just in case you missed it, I'll play it again because it happened pretty fast. So at about 11, we still have those northerly winds, and then right around 12 and 1 o'clock, you see how those winds shift direction. And then that's going to change where we're seeing our fire growth. That's where we'll have to keep an eye on the northern areas of the fire, that northern finger once again, and then seeing that northern area of that hotspot as well to make sure that doesn't move back into the area of Janesville once those gusty winds come in tomorrow at about 35 to 40 miles per hour. So overall, to summarize the Dixie Fire, I would say we're looking much better than in previous days, especially on that northern shore of Lake Almanor where we're not seeing any hotspots there. And Cal Fire did sound like they were fairly confident in the resources and the containment lines they'd put in place. But with that being said, there are some... And the other good news is that those northerly winds have been pushing that hotspot away from Susanville and that hotspot away from Janesville. So that's some of the other good news going on. Where I do still have some concern is that hotspot that's around Westwood, although I do know they have a lot of resources in there. They're doing structure protection, getting some lines in. Other areas of concern are that hotspot around Taylorsville, as that does look to be the most active part of the Dixie Fire right now. And then as those northerly winds continue over the next 12 hours, just to keep an eye on Milford as well, although that certainly looks like it's calmed down from what it looked like yesterday. So overall, much better day today on the Dixie Fire than we had in previous days, but we do still have some of those key areas to watch over the next 24 to 48 hours, and especially into the future as that wind shift happens tomorrow afternoon. It's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening once that wind shift does come in. So the next fire I want to talk about, and the next fires that I'm talking about are going to be much more brief than the Dixie Fire. I think we might have just spent 40 minutes talking about the Dixie Fire, which was pretty much the exact opposite of my plan coming into this. I wanted this to be a very concise forecast, so I'll try to be much more concise with the next fires, and that should be easy because we aren't seeing all that much activity on our key fires that we've been following, like the Caldor and the Monument Fire. So let's go down to the Caldor first. You can see that throughout the day today, we had that very thick smoke inversion over us once again. This is what kept our fire behavior down yesterday, and we were talking last night about how that smoke from the Dixie Fire was most likely going to create that smoke inversion again, and looking at the Caldor Fire, seems like that's exactly what happened throughout the day today. Much moderated fire behavior because of that smoke. And the reason for that, you just think if your forecast is for 95 degrees and you have all that smoke, sunlight can't get through, you only end up being 70 degrees. Then you have less of a temperature contrast, so you end up getting less afternoon winds. If you're forecasted to have 25 mile per hour winds, maybe you only get 10 or 15. So good to see that that smoke was over the Caldor Fire once again, moderating the fire behavior there. But with that being said, you can see those northerly winds starting to clear some of that smoke out. So we are going to have to watch that closely over the next couple hours, as it looks like the northern edge of that fire has the potential to become active again as that smoke is starting to move out. So interested to see how active it is right now. Yeah, you can see how moderated it was throughout the day today. In the past, this whole area right here was just glowing bright red, and it does look like we do still have some heat on it, so don't get me wrong, it is still burning and still seeing some activity, but definitely moderated throughout the day today. To really drive that point home, we can look at this camera right here. I'll remind you that this is the Leak Springs camera. This is the one we were watching the first day that I covered the Caldor Fire, when it might have been the craziest smoke plume that we've seen this entire season. It was just gigantic smoke plume coming up. It was creating some spot fires. This camera just looked ridiculous. I don't know any other way to put it. And this is what it's basically looked like the last 2 days. Now, at first glance, you might look at this and think that that just looks absolutely awful. You think it almost looks apocalyptic and terrible. But it's all that smoke that's actually been moderating our fire behavior on the Caldor Fire over the last 2 days. So when you look at that smoke, certainly is bad for air quality, which does have its own kind of health issues. Certainly bad as well if you want to use any kind of aircraft. But I would personally take that trade-off if it means reduced fire behavior and reduced fire spread, which is what we have seen on the Caldor Fire over the last 2 days. You can imagine any sunlight trying to get through there, trying to heat up the fuels down there, is going to have a very hard time getting through all of that smoke. So if we look at what the Caldor Fire looks like right now, that does kind of drive my point home in the fact I was saying that we do still have activity on this one. We did see some smoke coming off of it, and as some of that smoke cleared out, we do have the potential for it to start to pick up over the next couple of hours. But just looking at this map and compared to what it looked like 2 days ago, I would say this is some great news, because 2 days ago this entire circle right here was just glowing bright red, and every time we updated the map it was moving farther and farther to the northeast. And actually that's one other piece of good news, is that while we have that one day especially, it went from about 6,000 acres to about 50,000 acres. Most of that growth was away from where we have thousands of structures shown in those orange dots right there. So overall, Caldor Fire has given us a bit of a lucky break the last 2 days. And you can almost kind of thank the Dixie Fire for that, because it's the Dixie Fire that's spreading all that smoke down to the Caldor Fire to moderate some of that behavior. But with that being said, we are seeing some of that smoke clear, so certainly going to be watching this closely over the next few hours to see if we're able to finally punch through that smoke inversion now that the smoke appears to be getting a bit weaker. Now, one other thing that I do know on this map is their plan, should be easier to explain this by looking at the perimeter. Their plan is to first get some containment down on the southern edge where you can see there's less hotspots there, and then they're hoping to use that as an anchor point to then start to flank up the fire on the left side to protect a lot of these structures here, and they are already doing some structure protection and some lines over here, but they're hoping to create an anchor point on the southern edge so that they can then flank up this fire and hopefully get some containment on the southern edge, like we did see happen on the Dixie Fire. We got some containment on the southern edge here first, and then they were able to just flank up the sides like that, slowly getting more and more containment. So seems like a similar plan on the Caldor Fire there. So just summing up the hotspots, you can see that it does continue to grow to the northeast, but much moderated behavior when compared with, I believe it was 2 or 3 days ago now at this point. But we are going to have to keep an eye on this over the next couple of hours, as looks like that inversion that's been keeping fire behavior down is starting to lift. So just looking, I'm going to close some of the other tabs here real quick. So just looking at the Caldor Fire, let's update it, see if they've updated this recently. Looks like it's 12 hours ago, so we will likely see some jump in this number once they update it. But it does look like Caldor Fire is up to 65,000 acres. Again, even though that was updated 12 hours ago, you can see the considerable slowdown in the pace of the growth. In one day, we went from 6,500 acres to, I think, 53,000 acres in one day. And then in the last 2 days, looks like we're just from 53,000 to 65,000. So still seeing some growth on the Caldor Fire, although it does look like it's slowing. But the key thing I'm going to be watching is if that reduced speed of spread continues once those gusty winds come back in tomorrow afternoon, which we'll take a look at in a second. But first, just want to focus on that number right there. Last time we looked at this, there was only 242 personnel on the Caldor Fire, and you can see that our personnel has increased to 653, so that is some good news there. And one other thing that I will say that this just reminded me of is in Grizzly Flat. That is one area that we do have some bad news on. I was watching some video coming out of Grizzly Flat earlier today, and there are a large number of structures in that area that have been destroyed. I'll look for one of those damage assessment maps like I have for the Dixie Fire, and if I find that, I'll put that into the link in the description. Actually, let's look for it right now. And I could teach you guys to fish instead of just giving it to you. So what you do is you go to InciWeb, you go to the Caldor Fire, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, and they have related links, and doesn't look like they have that damage assessment map in there yet. But that's a gold mine when it comes to all these wildfires, to find very relevant, important information. The relevant links there, like Facebook pages, Twitter pages, or some of those maps that they make. But I will keep an eye out for that to try to include in future videos. So let's look at the Caldor Fire forecast again. Just showing this again, that low that was creating those northerly winds is starting to move out. And then it looks like we're going to switch to more westerly winds as we get into Friday evening. So this is another little trick I'll teach you guys how to do. Where is it? Looking for the latitude and longitude right there. You get the latitude and longitude from your InciWeb page for the Caldor Fire. You go to windy. You type that in, you delete the word latitude, and then you search it, and it takes you directly to where that fire is burning, so then you can look at the fire weather forecast. Now, we'll delete that because that can sometimes get a bit overwhelming with all those numbers, and we'll go back to the current time right now. So as of right now, it does look like we still have some winds over the fire, although this is model data, and I would say that our winds are actually less than this is showing because of that smoke inversion that we've had over us throughout the day today. Good news is those winds, we are going to have some strong westerly winds, or easterly winds. That even, see, I'm working towards my master's in meteorology right now, and even I get confused by the westerly, easterly saying of winds. So winds blowing from the east to the west overnight tonight. So on the Caldor Fire, I am going to be watching that western edge because it does look like we are going to have some of those stronger winds come in tonight. So we'll be watching that, although it looks like there's much reduced hotspot activity in that area, but going to keep my eye on it. And then as we get into tomorrow afternoon, you can see that wind shift that I was talking about, where we're shifting back to southwesterly winds instead of those northerly winds that we have had over the last 2 days. And it does look like it's going to be relatively gusty, 20 to 25 miles per hour. So what that's going to do is most likely take that area on the northeastern edge of the Caldor Fire and continue to push that farther up to the northeast. So bad news if you're the structures to the northeast up here, but I would say good news because that's still going to be moving the fire away from the thousands of structures we see over here on the western edge of the Caldor Fire when it's the hottest, driest, most dangerous time of the day. So temperature-wise, it's going to be relatively warm tomorrow in the mid-80s, possibly cooler than that if we still manage to have some of that smoke sitting over us. And then humidity, relatively dry. That says 21%, but I was looking at some observations which were showing some relative humidity in the teens, so certainly still dry air. Going to have some gusty winds, and we have critically dry fuels in this area, so certainly going to be watching the Caldor Fire closely over the next couple of days as that wind shift comes in, and we will likely see some continued growth to the northeast. Now, I almost wasn't going to show this because it shows way more growth than I'm actually expecting, but I am going to show it because it shows what would have happened if we didn't have firefighters throughout the day today, and if we didn't have that smoke inversion, or I should say what the model predicted would have happened. So again, if you're just joining the live stream, this is the Warfest fire model. We run this out of the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory, one of the top wildfire models in the world. It combines the fire perimeter with the fuel, weather, topography, variables, and then also predicts how the wildfire will create its own weather, and then how that's going to impact the wildfire, and then it simulates where that acreage burned is going to be over the next 2 days. But we're not going to look at the forecast for tomorrow because I think it'll still be a bit tricky, because I think we'll still have some smoke over us, so that forecast will most likely be diminished. But that's part of the reason I want to show it for today, because I want to show that what this model was predicting if we hadn't had that smoke inversion over us with a lot of that smoke that we got from the Dixie Fire. So pressing play here, again, this is showing what was predicted for today, but didn't end up happening because we had so much smoke over the Caldor Fire, diminishing or lowering our temperatures, lowering our winds, and lowering just fire behavior overall. So without further ado, this is what the model was predicting for the day today. It's predicting these two areas of the fire were actually going to start to grow together, and then a large amount of growth towards that eastern edge as those westerly winds started to come in with that northerly push as well, especially into this afternoon. You can see it's just predicting tens of thousands of acres burned, and especially on that southeastern edge, fueled by those northerly winds. But that smoke inversion kept our winds down, kept our temperatures down throughout the day today. So instead of looking like that, we pretty much still look like that. So could have been that. Instead, we look like that. So that's where I know I occasionally get some pushback when I say all of that smoke is a good thing, because it is certainly bad for air quality and that does have health effects. But when you're just looking at fire growth and fire spread and fire behavior, all that smoke has certainly helped to calm down the Caldor Fire. But with that being said, that is the big reason that I'm going to be watching it closely over the next couple of hours, is because we're starting to see some of that smoke clear out. So I'm going to be very interested to see if we're able to punch through that smoke inversion over the next couple of hours, as it does look like some of that wind is finally starting to move out. But the good news has come in throughout the day today, as once again that smoke inversion over us kept our fire behavior down and overall just led to a great day. But now I want to transition or I should just say my overall forecast for the Caldor Fire. Overall forecast is we're going to have those strong southwesterly winds coming in tomorrow afternoon. So unfortunately, that means that we're going to have less of this smoke blowing down from the Dixie Fire, creating that protective layer over the Caldor Fire. So those strong southwesterlies are going to blow some of that smoke out. So we are going to have to watch that one very closely tomorrow, because that protective smoke layer we've had the last 2 days will most likely be diminished as those winds shift around and push some of that smoke out of the area. Now, with that being said, you might be worried about air quality, and that would be certainly some good news for you, and we will look at the air quality forecast in a second. But first, I do want to go up to the northwestern parts of California, all those lightning fires that started on the 29th and the 30th. You can see the river complex appears to be the most active wildfire going on in California right now, but there's not as many structures around that one, so I actually want to focus on what's underneath all of that smoke from the river complex, and that is the Monument Fire. So we'll just scroll over on this map first, because I want to make the point that the Monument Fire is officially out of that red flag warning, which is some great news there. And then if we look at the hotspots, we have continued to see the heat on the southeastern edge of the Monument Fire, which has been my main concern for the last 3 or 4 days because of those northerly winds that have been pushing the fire closer towards Hayfork. But just like the Caldor Fire, we've had that very thick smoke over the Monument Fire for the last 2 days, and that has been keeping our conditions much calmer than they otherwise would have been. Again, we had the red flag warning over this area for much of yesterday and the day before. Day before, we did have a lot of activity and a lot of push to the south, but yesterday, with all that smoke we had from the river complex, really calmed down the Monument Fire, and looks like it's calming the Monument Fire down as of right now as well, which makes sense because you can see how much smoke is coming off of the river complex, which doesn't allow much heat to get into the Monument Fire area. So that's what it looks like right now. You can see where those structures are, so you can see where my main concerns are. Junction City, I do believe we've already seen some structures destroyed in that area. And then my main concern on the Monument Fire is still the Hayfork area, as you can see how close that fire perimeter has come to some of these structures on the northern edge of Hayfork. I believe we still have some evacuation orders in place there. And then Weaverville, that may be my concern going over the next 2 days as we shift back to southwesterly winds and the fire starts to make a push back to the northeast. Going to be watching Weaverville very closely over the next couple of days, although that would be good news for Hayfork once those winds shift around, because that would start to blow this fire back into itself where it already burned in the past. But do want to look at those live hotspots, and that is where we have some great news right there. You can see, now actually, before I get too excited about saying this is great news, we have so much smoke over the Monument Fire right now that there is a chance that the satellite isn't able to actually punch through that smoke to be able to pick up where those hotspots are. So take this map with a grain of salt, because there could actually be some fire activity just north of Hayfork, and we just can't see it because there is so much smoke blocking the satellite heat detection sensors. But with that being said, I am still going to keep a very close eye on the Hayfork, Junction City, and Weaverville areas. Even though it doesn't look like there's hotspots there right now, I think those continue to be some of the main concerns, as well as the Burnt Ranch area where we do still have that hotspot right there. And I'll have to check and see if there's been any structures destroyed in that area. If you know, please post in the live chat. But again, I am trying to make this video more concise, so apologies for if you've been asking questions in the live chat. I don't even have my other screen on right now, so I'm not checking the live chat. I'll try to go through and look for any questions that I can answer towards the end of the video. But when it comes to the Monument Fire, let's update this again, see if there's been a new update. Looks like that one has seen a large amount of growth, most of that being on that southerly edge as those northerly winds have continued to push in. So that one is up to 135,000 acres and still only at 10% containment. When we look at the personnel on it, right around 900 personnel. So that's still some good news there, considering how many different fires we have going on in Northern California. You can just take a step back and look at what California looks like right now. We have River Complex, Monument Fire, Mcfarland Fire, Dixie Fire, Antelope Fire, Caldor Fire. I wouldn't say we're at 2020 levels yet, but California is certainly, you can see that we're in the midst of what has the potential to end up being a historic fire season. So when it comes to the Monument Fire, I want to do that one little trick again because I want to see how strong the winds are going to be there tomorrow, because that is an area where we often have some gusty winds. Let's delete the word latitude and search. It'll take us right over to the Weaverville area, and it actually looks like it's already, oh no, that's in, yeah, I was confused there for a second. Still have those northerly winds, still looking gusty, which makes sense because we have all that smoke, but I would say some of that activity has been moderated throughout the day today because of all of that smoke. Looking into tonight, looks like our winds are going to significantly calm down for once, which is some great news there, but as we get into tomorrow afternoon, they are going to be very strong, and what I think is a concern is you can see that they're pointed directly towards the Weaverville area. So if you were to combine where we have those hot spots right now and the winds tomorrow, that's where I do have some concern for Junction City and Weaverville moving forward. But there's also still the chance that we still have so much smoke over the Monument Fire that the conditions are significantly moderated like they were throughout the day today. But I do think there is some cause for concern looking at the forecast for tomorrow, as we have some very gusty winds up to 35, which means in some of the drainages and canyons might be more like 40. So we'll have to continue to watch this one closely, looking at the temperatures. Significantly warm in the mid 80s, yeah, not mid 90s, so warm but not crazy hot. And then humidity relatively dry, less dry than our other fires because those northwesterly winds do push in a little bit of moisture from the ocean. But fuels in this area are critically dry, so once those gusty winds come in tomorrow afternoon, I think we are going to have to keep a very close eye on the Monument Fire, and especially Hayfork, Junction City, and Weaverville, and Burnt Ranch as well. So basically all the cities around it. But just to drive my point home on how much smoke was over the Monument Fire throughout the day today, and how it seemed like that was creating some moderated activity. Certainly looks that way based on the hotspot map. This is actually, before I show this, I guess I kind of already am showing it, but you can see Weaverville's right there, Hayfork's right there, this camera's right here pointing right directly into where that fire burns, and you can see how much smoke we had over the Hayfork Fire throughout the day today. Or not the Hayfork Fire, the Monument Fire. It's the Hayfork camera. That's what I meant to say. You can see very orange skies, which does look rather apocalyptic, but I said this for the Caldor cam as well. It's actually good news to see your skies look like that, because that means less sunlight's able to find its way through. It can't heat up the fuels as much, and then with less temperature gradients, you end up with less winds. So I always kind of like seeing cameras that look that smoky over an active fire, because it tends to make the fire less active, which I think is an okay trade-off for air quality and not being able to use aircraft. So when it comes to the Monument Fire, moderated activity because of all that smoke, but we're going to have some gusty winds coming in tomorrow around 35 miles per hour, which will most likely push some of that moderating smoke out of the area, and then we're going to have to keep a very close eye on what happens after that. So I do just also want to briefly mention the other fires going on: Monument Fire, River Complex, and Antelope Fire. When it comes to the Monument Fire, you can see that's another one that was moderated throughout the day today because of all that smoke. But that one is up to 110,000 acres, but that one is up to 51% containment as well, which is some good news there. Now, you can see what I would say is the most active fire in California right now, and that would be the river complex, where that looks to be the only real pyrocumulus that we have in California right now, coming off of that section of the fire right there, where those northerly winds continue to push that fire farther down to the south. When it comes to the river complex, that one is up to 64,000 acres and still only at 10% containment. Personnel on it is 800 though, so they are doing some good work up there to try to raise that containment in the days ahead. And then up to the northeast, we have the Antelope Fire, which I would say did see mostly moderated activity throughout the day today. You can see that just based on the hotspot map. No large pyrocumulus cloud coming off of that one like we usually have. At one point, the Antelope Fire actually created its own lightning storm and started a lightning fire, but certainly not seeing that right now. Antelope Fire overall is up to 63,000 acres and 27% containment. So, when it comes to the weather forecast for tomorrow, which is going to drive our change moving forward, the big change is that low that's been driving those northerly winds the past couple days finally leaving, which I would say good riddance. That red flag warning will finally, or hopefully, be disappearing as well. I don't say it will definitely be disappearing though, because it looks like right behind it, Friday evening, we have another one of those lows going into Washington and Oregon, looking fairly similar to that last system that just came through that created that red flag warning, although I'd say slightly weaker setup overall, and it appears like it moves through quicker, so I think the impacts won't be as bad. But with that being said, zooming out and looking at the wind forecast for tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have some 35 to 40 mile per hour gusts over the Monument Fire, and some possibly 30 to 35 mile per hour gusts over the Dixie Fire from that southwesterly direction. So winds switching direction from what they have been over the last couple of days. So that's likely going to shift our fire direction as well. And it will also start to blow some of this smoke out of California. So if we want to see what the air quality looks like right now, you can see based on that satellite imagery, it certainly doesn't look good. And based on the interactive map of air quality, you can see that it is in fact not good. Almost all of Northern California is into that unhealthy range. And then, no surprise, underneath that river complex plume, we have very unhealthy to hazardous air. So that is actually where some of the good news comes in. If you don't like that poor air quality, that's going to act to push some of that smoke out once those southwesterly winds come in tomorrow afternoon. So most likely clearing some of that smoke out, but again, that's also going to get rid of some of the great moderating effects that we've had over the Caldor Fire and the Monument Fire. So that's why we're going to have to watch those closely over the next 24 hours to see how they change. Now, that's what it looks like right now. If we want to see the forecast for what it looks like tomorrow, let's see. So northerly winds still pushing that smoke down throughout the night tonight. It's going to be settling down throughout the overnight hours because those winds become very weak, so that's able to allow that smoke just to settle down to the surface. And then if we pause it at the end of this model run right about there, I missed it. So if we go to the end of the model run, that's what we're expected to look like at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. So the reason for that, we have northerly winds continuing throughout the night tonight. That's going to take that smoke from the river complex and the Dixie Fire, continue to push it over the Bay Area, and then our winds are going to die overnight, so that smoke is going to be able to settle down to the surface. So most likely going to be seeing some bad air quality when you're waking up tomorrow morning, but with that big wind shift that we have coming in tomorrow afternoon, you can see that onshore flow start to push back in. That is going to push that smoke out of the Bay Area and out of much of California as well. So if this continued farther into the forecast, you would see that smoke blow right out and up into Nevada, Idaho, and Oregon, which is good news when it comes to air quality and the ability to use aircraft, but it's also bad news when it comes to the great moderating effects that we've had over the Monument Fire and the Caldor Fire over the last 2 days. So now, again, apologies for not checking the live chat at all throughout the course of this video. I was trying to just get all the most important information out there as fast as I could. But now I will try to take a look at the live chat and see if there were any questions that popped up, to see if I'm able to answer them before I wrap up this video. So, see this one that just came in. I think it has to do with what I was talking about with the smoke. Seems phenomenon in which shade from smoke cools the ground below it, creating a temperature gradient not so different from the cold fronts that appear on meteorological forecasts. So yeah, that was a big thing that I was talking about for the Caldor Fire and the Monument Fires especially, is when you actually, it's easier to explain with the Dixie Fire, I think, because we also have seen this activity happen on the Dixie Fire before. So on the Dixie Fire, what usually happens during the afternoon hours is, or during the nighttime and early morning hours, we get those down canyon winds right here. And then what happens at almost every single day around 12 or 1 o'clock, not the last couple days because we've had that strong northerly wind push, but usually for the Dixie Fire, around 12 or 1 o'clock, the canyons heat up, and then you start getting those very strong up canyon winds blowing from the southwest. That's why most of our growth on the Dixie Fire has been to the north and northeast, because almost every afternoon the canyon heats up, and then it drives those winds up the canyon, and that's what leads to a lot of fire spread. So what we did see on the Dixie Fire, I believe a week ago, was there was such a thick smoke layer that the sunlight wasn't able to get through that smoke. So then the canyon didn't heat up as much, so then we didn't get as strong of up canyon winds. And then with less strong winds, you get less fire growth. So great moderating effects from that smoke, keeps your temperatures down, which also keeps the winds down as well. So just going to try to scroll through here again. I'm just going to keep my eye out for any question marks that I see. And then if I see them, I will try my best to answer them. And also I see that Lucy and Trish have been on the live chat, and based on the comments I've seen so far, it looks like you guys have once again done a fantastic job moderating the live chat. And that is always helpful, because especially when I do these concise videos where I'm just not looking at the live chat and trying to get all the information out as fast as I can, it's very helpful for people if there's not a bunch of trolls in the live chat, so that since I can't answer the questions, other people are able to. And I'll scroll right back down. And I see, how long did last year's fires last? What month/day were they all officially out? Basically, how long can we expect this to keep up? So that is, so I see someone says, check your donation box. I didn't think I had a donation box. If I have, I don't think I've set it up. I have noticed that super chats are able to come in, but I don't know about a donation box. What was the question I was just looking at? So, how long did last year's fires start? So how does this compare with last year? So it's actually pretty interesting, because the big fires last year started, we had the 1-year anniversary of them about 2 days ago. Remember when that crazy lightning event came through California? It was the moisture from Tropical Storm Fausto was funneled into California, created hundreds of lightning fires across the state, and then that's what sparked the LNU lightning complex, the SCU, and the CZU lightning complex, and that really kicked off our fire season last year. So you can see we got a much earlier start this time around. We've had, especially the Dixie Fire, I think I've been covering this one for about 3 weeks at this point. Covered a number of other fires like the Tamarack Fire, the Bootleg Fire, the Beckworth Complex. So got an earlier start to fire season this time around. I would say the main reason for that is because of how critically dry the fuels are. Just looking at the drought map, I think this pretty much sums up what I'm going to try to say to answer your question. Looking at the drought map and how critically dry the fuels are, also combining this with what we know from our research at the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Lab, where we're showing the driest fuel moistures we've ever recorded. That's part of the reason we got such an early start to fire season. Any ignition that happened was able to rapidly spread because of how dry the fuels are. And unfortunately, we don't get rain typically until maybe the end of October, and sometimes not even until mid-November. So our fuels are going to remain critically dry. So I hate to say it, you guys know me, I usually try to err on the positive sides of things and get some kind of silver lining, but our fuels are about as dry as we've ever seen in California, and we're most likely not going to be getting any rainfall until late October or possibly even into mid-November. So unfortunately, I would say fire season most likely going to be lasting until late October or mid-November. The big question mark there is when we start to get some of those rainstorms coming in. Sooner the better, but just based on our luck so far this year, I wouldn't really count on any big rain events coming in. And it sounds like you did do some super chats. That, again, I apologize for not responding to them whenever they first came in. I had my screen off throughout the course of this entire video just so I could look at the maps that I was talking about. But thank you very much. That'll pay for my my dinner tonight. You guys got me a nice burrito last night. So thanks again for all your guys' support. Thanks again also for all the great questions, all the great comments. Huge thank you to my moderators Trish, Lucy, occasionally White Dove, and Robert Forrest as well. You guys all do a fantastic job. I do think I'm going to wrap it up here though, so that I can continue to try to regain my voice from that 7.5 hour live stream I did the other day, which kind of burnt both my voice out and me out. So I'm going to wrap it up here, but key thing I'm going to say is that tomorrow afternoon we do have some of those gusty winds coming in, and it's a wind shift. It looks like we're transitioning back to southwesterly winds over the Dixie Fire, more westerly winds over the Monument Fire. So there's going to be some big changes over the next 24 hours, so certainly going to be keeping a very close eye on it. So stay tuned. You can subscribe to this channel if you want to stay tuned with these daily updates and forecasts on all the California wildfires. And then you can also click the notification bell to actually get updated when I go live, so then you can try to ask questions while I am live. So thanks again to the moderators. Thanks again to all the firefighters out there who are just doing an amazing job working around the clock on these fires. Thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. And I hope you all have a great weekend, and thanks for watching.